What is the most random NSFW history fact that you didn't learn in school? I read that Victor Hugo slept with so many prostitutes that all the brothels in Paris were closed on the day of his death because they all took the day off to mourn his death. President Warren G. Harding had a 6-year-long affair with a lady named Nan Britton, who in her autobiography said that she and Harding had sex in a closet in the White House, and claimed that Harding was the father of her daughter. At the time of its publishing, the book was met with public ridicule and widely discounted as the stuff of pornographic fiction. Britton was labeled a sex pervert and degenerate, and a book was even written to counter her claims about Harding, who was married to another woman. It was confirmed in 2015 through Ancestry DNA testing that the descendants of Harding and Britton were indeed related. During the war, the British dropped pictures of Hitler with his D out in Germany. One of the most intriguing and insidious insults to Adolf Hitler was a propaganda postcard code numbered H789 produced by director Sefton Delmer of the British Political Warfare Executive, PWE, that showed the Führer with his D in his hand. The postcard chosen to caricature was originally a product of Photo Hoffmann of Munich. Hitler stands on what appears to be balcony with his left hand on the rail and his right hand on his waist. In the parody, his right hand is depicted holding a circumcised D. This probably was designed to feed the rumor that Hitler was indeed a self-hating Jew. Source: Fath Ali Shah Qajar, second king in Qajar dynasty in Iran, about 200 years ago, had 160 wives. Nasiruddin Shah Qajar had about 50. In Islam you're not allowed to marry more than 4 wives at the same time. It is said that Nasiruddin Shah was once walking in his palace and saw a beautiful girl, and asked if he could marry her. Everyone was looking at him weirdly and he asked why. One of his servants said that she was his daughter. Charles II, Charles the Impotent, was the convergence point for several generations of royal inbreeding and was born with significant disabilities. His parents were desperate for him to produce an heir. They implemented a system of ropes and pulleys to lower virgins onto him in hopes he could impregnate one. It didn't work and the dynasty collapsed. Catherine the Great of Russia was quite fond of sex. She had multiple lovers, many of them much younger than her. Her last lover, Prince Zubov, was 40 years younger than her. She often raised her lovers to high positions and gave them gifts. She had also a registered sign Pravus, tester of male capacity, who had sex with any potential lovers before they were allowed to spend the night with Catherine. This person was Countess Praskovia Bruce, confidant of her. Catherine had also erotic art and furniture. Legends say that she died while having sex with horse, but this is not actually the case. There are little D's engraved on the pavement in Pompeii that point towards brothels. Those little D's survived volcanic eruption, as did some NSFW paintings inside the buildings. James Joyce wrote a ton of super dirty live letters to his then partner future wife. I mean, you had an ass full of farts that night, darling, and I ducked them out of you. Big fat fellows, long windy ones, quick little merry cracks and a lot of tiny little naughty farters ending in a long gush from your hole. It is wonderful to duck a farting woman when every duck drives one out of her. I think I would know Nora's fart anywhere. I think I could pick hers out in a room full of farting women. It is a rather girlish noise, not like the wet windy fart which I imagine fat wives have. It is sudden and dry and dirty like what a bold girl would let off in fun in a school dormitory at night. I hope Nora will let off no end of her farts in my face so that I may know their smell also. 12-year-old Pocahontas used to entertain white colonists with nude cartwheels. This is actually one of the few things we know about her that's indisputable. Rasputin convinced tons of women to sleep with him using religion, claiming that forgiveness was the highest grace and that unless you sinned, you could not be forgiven. There was a Victorian sexual purity activist who was staunchly anti-masturbation, and surprisingly, descriptions of masturbation in general society at the time were so broad and so couched in euphemism that one day she found out that she'd actually been masturbating for years without knowing that that's what she'd been doing. Mozart wrote several songs about analingus. Leck mich im Arsch, lick me in the ass, leck mir den Arsch fein recht schön sauber, lick my ass nicely, lick it nice and clean. English translated lyrics for Leck mir den Arsch fein recht schön sauber, according to Wikipedia, more than lick my ass nicely, more than More than lick it nice and clean. More than ass and clean. Lick my ass. More than that's a greasy desire. More than asleep buttered. More than like the licking of roast meat. My daily activity. More than 3 will lick more than 2. More than come on. Just try it. More than and lick. La Palatine, Louis' second sister-in-law, who had quite a temper, replied harshly to the king, slapped her son, a prince in public, loved to take it in the outdoor. She wrote countless letters saying she hated Versailles because she had to it around valets and thus could not enjoy her it dropping. That the ancient Egyptians believed that the god Atum, after creating himself from water, created 2 other gods, Shu and Tefnut, to build the world either by masturbating and spitting his own semen from his mouth or having sexual intercourse with his shadow depending on the myth. Edit. Just noticed a repeated word and I can't live with that. Turns out Anne Frank talks a lot about masturbation in her diary. King Edward VI really loved prostitutes but found himself hindered by his weight, so he had a special chair commissioned to keep at his favorite French brothel. His chair allowed him to have threesomes with the prostitutes while also being able to support his weight since he didn't want to crush his partner's. The group of people who lived in ancient Peru who would go to great pains to only depict sodomy on their pottery. They were super anal about only depicting certain sex acts, if you catch my drift. Left square bracket. That Genghis Khan ducked enough of Asia to ensure his bloodline would continue for generations regardless of what peoples lived or died. While gay sex was illegal in the UK in the 19th century, lesbian sex wasn't, because the patriarchal government refused to believe it was a thing. Queen Victoria loved sex, as attested by her 9 kids in about 18 years. She loved sex but hated pregnancy. She never announced her pregnancies. The newspapers would report that she became ill for an afternoon. Then boom. New royal prince or princess. Also, any woman who had painkillers during labor can thank Queen Victoria. She helped popularize the use of chloroform during birth. Pretty sure they had to write to the Archbishop of Canterbury for permission, as labor is supposed to be painful. Bible, original sin, etc. The Egyptians did not wear helmets to build the Great Pyramids. The Palace of Versailles in France was huge and had numerous people coming in and out, because of a number of reasons. If people really needed to, they would defecate or piss in any corner of the palace and just leave it there. It was also nearby a river of sewage, so just coming near the palace reeked. It's not how you would like to imagine Marie Antoinette living. King Louis V had a chamber pot with a picture of Ben Franklin in the bottom given to a lady who Franklin had bedded. Hitler started the first anti-smoking campaign and commissioned the first blow-up dolls to be made for his soldiers so they would stop getting STDs from prostitutes. They were convenient because they could be folded and fit in their rucksacks easy and take up little room and little weight. And there was a female Nazi scientist named Elsa. She was studying the effects of gangrene, syphilis, and how much pain the body could take among other diseases. She also believed that women were superior to men and that women had superior pain thresholds to men. Sorry for any spelling or grammar, I am dyslexic. Don't know if this is fact or fiction, but Napoleon allegedly had a huge sweat fetish. Whenever he'd be at war or wherever far away from home, he would write letters to his wife telling her not to bathe until he'd come home. Poet Shel Silverstein used to work for Playboy magazine and was good friends with Hefner. He spent a great deal of his time at the Playboy mansion. Rape of Nanking. Japan really doesn't get enough it for all the war crimes they committed during the war. A Moldavian heresiarch in the Middle Ages who founded his little sect on ideals of sexual freedom and pretty prescient notions in regards to individualism, also employed a massive harem of fingerers. He did not select his concubines according to external beauty, but only cared about the respective length and width of their fingers. In other words, he used his sexual servants like a collection of multi-jointed dildos. Reportedly his favorite was a burly lumberjack with broad yet dexterous fingers, which had to regularly be shorn to maintain proper hygiene and appeal. The person who killed Simon de Montfort sent his detached ballsack to his wife, who then wore them on her hat as it turned out. Ben Franklin fancied French prostitutes. Lyndon Johnson had a huge cock. which he nicknamed Jumbo. He was famous for pulling it out to assert dominance, or talking to people randomly at the urinals with it out. Personally, I was thrilled they brought up this detail in The Crown. The image of a witch flying with a broomstick comes from women that rubbed hallucination drugs in their V's, using a broomstick. The whole history of colonization of Congo by Belgium is NSFL. They used to chop off hands of their slaves if they didn't fill out their daily quota. Men, women, children, no exception. Disturbing article. Father stares at the hand and foot of his 5-year-old, severed as a punishment for failing to make the daily rubber quota. Belgian Congo, 1904. Ancient Egyptians used to use crocodile dung as a contraceptive by shoving dried dung up their hoo-ha to form an impenetrable barrier. There were human zoos up to 1958, last one in Belgium. Human zoos were very common on Europe and North America, usually displaying indigenous people from Africa and South Asia. It was quite popular and wasn't seen as weird. They even displayed pygmy people as the missing link. Edit. An article about this. Cleopatra used a tube filled with bees as a vibrator. Leonardo da Vinci often drew cartoons of oral sex in his notes, complete with the names of his male students labeling the D's and or mouths. In essence, he was drawing cartoons of his desire to sexually exploit his students and other young men in his social circles. Ben Franklin loved to duck. It's rumored he even boned the Queen of France. The killing fields of Choangak is the most harrowing, heinous place I've ever visited. Grief is actually palpable there. Every visitor is subdued. There is a solemn tree, Chankiri tree, that resembled some abstract art piece with bracelets woven together and draping from the bark like a shroud. They appear emblematic of the streams of blood from babies and children whose heads were bashed against it to preclude any retribution from them when they had grown up. A dead child cannot avenge its murdered parents. They were executed for a lack of compliance with Cambodia's Khmer Rouge Communist Party. The executioners and soldiers were impelled to laugh, or it would be construed they felt remorse or compassion for the victims. They feared they'd be executed too, allegedly. Allow me to weave you the tale of one Carl Emil Pettersson. Who is this man? Well, he was born in the late 1800s and was a sturdy Swedish sailed by the turn of the century at the start of the 1900s. Cole was a strapping lad, and this history lesson begins with him in his prime. At the age of about 30 in the year 1904, he shipwrecked on Tabar Island, notable for inhabitants who practiced cannibalism, and instead of being eaten married the king's daughter, became the king, and lived a fairly successful life by starting a coconut plantation. To put things into perspective, this guy was a tall, muscular Swedish sailor famous for his physical strength. This Swedish Chad survived a shipwreck, seduced a cannibal princess, became a king, and then started a ducking coconut plantation. Ducking legend. 1. Zeus ducked everyone and everything. 2. Famed Irish writer James Joyce was raunchy AF. 3. My grandfather was hospitalized for almost 3 months during World War I because he ducked his way through France and contracted super gonorrhea. That people in the Victorian times were horny bastards, and I'm not totally sure, but I'm going to say royals for now, but may have just been any important person's marriage. Basically, on the night of the wedding, they would go to bed and consummate the marriage. However, there would be an audience to witness it. I was also told, and in some cases, the marriage would be annulled if the woman didn't give off at least a little bit of blood, because she was supposed to be a virgin. How ducking weird the marginalia in illuminated manuscripts were. These important books are celebrated for being beautiful, handmade works of art in a time when books were not very common. However, a lot of them had some really weird it in the margins. Here are just a few examples of what I mean. NSFW. In ancient times, only the receptive partner in gay sex was viewed negatively and punished. You could top or get blowjobs from men with impunity. This was because it was viewed that a man taking a D was acting like a woman and was therefore as worthless as they were. Even less so because they didn't bear children. Being a homophobe based on ancient texts requires you to find women worthless too, or it's a nonsensical position. The Pope Leo X, the one during the Luther's reformations, used tons of gold, around at least 3,000 kilograms, maybe more, dunno RN, for partying and orgies with young, not even into puberty most often. boys. That one queen used to kidnap virgins and kill them and drain their blood so she could bathe in it, believing it would keep her young. Tentacle hentai was created to circumvent Japan's censorship laws that prohibited showing a D enter a V. Hitler really liked sugar. His doctor even gave him eye drops made from it. At my Catholic school, each grade that passed was attached to a certain saint that we would pray to and learn about. Our saint was Saint Catherine of Siena. In the 5 years I learnt about this woman, they failed to mention that this chick had visions of wearing baby Jesus' circumcised foreskin as a wedding ring. Apparently that's it I had to figure out on my own. Saints are duckin' weird, man. Back around the Civil War era, to immunize themselves from smallpox, people would purposely give themselves cowpox by cutting open an infected person's pustules, then taking the pus and rubbing it in a wound. The problem was people couldn't tell the difference between cowpox and syphilis, so a lot of people gave themselves syphilis. Emperor Tiberius of Rome liked having his toes sucked by little kids he called his minnows. King Edward VI was so big that he had a special chair built so that he could have sex with his mistresses. The chair even has its own Wikipedia entry. Edit. Here's an article with a picture included. In Norse mythology, the universe was licked into being by a magic giant space cow. Also, Loki was the mother of Odin's 8-legged horse. Thor once had to wear a bridal gown and almost marry a giant to get his hammer back. Norse gods are like drunken frat boys. That a frighteningly large percentage of famous and powerful people use the services of pedophile providers like Jeffrey Epstein, and that there's almost never any justice for the victims. A major problem that Henry V's army faced leading up to the Battle of Agincourt was disease, or more specifically, dysentery. As you may know, one of the effects of dysentery is severe diarrhea. During the battle, many of the archers, positioned in a stationary fashion, were said to have removed their pants so as to be able to fight and it at the same time. IDK miscount, but Zeus marrying Hera was rather weird and definitely NSFW. So he wanted to marry her, but she said that she could never love him. So he set her a challenge. If she said that she loved him in that week, he could marry her, and if not, he'd move on. He then disappeared and turned into an injured bird that flew to Hera's window. Capital S. She nursed the bird back to health and upon releasing it said she loved it. Boom. Zeus appears and it's duck time. That's the Olympus How I Met Your Mother. Oh. And they were siblings. Margaret Howe lover jacking off a dolphin on LSD for NASA. The Mexican artist Diego Rivera cheated on his wife, Frida Kahlo, with their female servants. Kahlo was bisexual and retaliated by cheating on Rivera with all of their servants, male and female. Wasn't mandatory to wear hard hats till 1992. Anne Lister of Halifax had diaries filled with her sexual encounters with other women in the early 1800s, and it was all written in code. An ancestor in the late 1890s was excited to attempt to crack to the code, and when he finally did, it was pages and pages of detailed descriptive sex between Anne and other women. He panicked and hid them in a wall at Shibden Hall, the family estate, and they remained there until found in 1933. At that point it was still considered scandalous, so they were again kept away until published publicly in 1988. Syphilis. Just about everyone had syphilis. They used to make wood carvings of nudity before the internet. As a kid, this really made me feel better about constantly thinking about sex. Edit. Still does. I remember my history teacher in high school was the very first person to admit members of the royal family, not just from England but many other countries, ducked pretty much everything that had a heartbeat. Homosexuality, bestiality, cross-dressing, coke-fueled orgies, the works. Florence Nightingale told her nurses to have sex with the military patients. Her reasoning was that it would improve their morale and the guys would probably die soon anyway. The nurses were responsible for stees being spread around. Ben Franklin screwed everything that walked or crawled. The Danish writer, Hans Christian Andersen, used to make a small line in the middle writing. He did that every time he finished jerking off. When the Nazis performed surgery on death camp prisoners, they did it while the patient was fully conscious. There was a woman named Marguerite Marie Alabert, and she was a well-known French prostitute, and she was 15. She was taken out of school and she worked as a servant. but was fired when she was pregnant and gave birth to a daughter who was sent away. She had affairs with famous people such as the Prince of Wales, which ended up ruining his reputation. She ended up marrying Ali Fahmy, a rich Egyptian playboy who was 10 years younger than her, but the marriage ended badly and she ended up killing him. Lots of rape. Like what the duck? During the Crusades the English rode male horses because they are more powerful. The Arabs rode female horses because they are more obedient. This led to a whole lot of awkwardness on the battlefield as the horses got jiggy with it despite their riders trying to kill each other. Learned this one in school actually. College. Many ancient Greek creations, columns, pots, vases, etc. were decorated with pictures and sculptures of geese. Handles on vases were traditionally geese.